Well, thank you for joining us for this third training in a series on all different aspects of ESPC project execution. My name is Dub Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Energy Services Coalition. We are a training and support and technical assistance partner for the U.S. Department of Energy for the ESPC campaign. This is, again, the third training that has been organized around the topics here. And just a couple of housekeeping items that I'm going to cover before I hand it over to our main presenter, Chris Halpin, today. First of all, you will receive a copy of the slides from today's presentation. So if you have colleagues who weren't able to join in person, they'll have access to the information later. We also will have some polling that we'll conduct during the training today to try to make improvements and make it more useful and relevant to you going forward. We welcome that. The other thing is that this webinar is being recorded. It'll be provided in that format later. You are welcome to ask questions either in the chat, Q&A, or raise your hand during the presentation. You'll have the ability to do that. So please do that if you feel that it's the right time to answer a question. If you do ask a question during the recorded part, just bear in mind it will be part of the recording. We'll also have an opportunity for you to provide input toward the end, and we'll capture that in a more anonymous fashion, which won't be recorded. So hopefully that's clear. So if you ask during the presentation, it'll be part of the recording. So not that anything that's going to be asked is super sensitive, but just want to let you know. Unmute your mic or raise your hand if you do have a question. And again, this will be posted online minus the Q&A and the polling information. So, Chris, next slide. Okay, so again, my name is Dub Taylor, ED with the ESC, and I'm going to turn it over now to Chris Halpin. Chris, longtime DOE project facilitator for ESPC projects and consultant. He is our training lead and technical lead for the Energy Services Coalition, and you'll be hearing him from now on through the training today. So, Chris, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody at Department of Energy for getting this set up, especially Laura Carpenter at SCEP and Dan Stockmall, her fellow. And the rest of our team here at Energy Services Coalition, Jamie Garrett. A little bit about me. I've been doing this for longer than I want to admit. and especially around performance contracting. I've been involved in performance contracting since 1996. Before that, I was doing energy auditing, other kinds of consulting in utility arena and schools and hospitals all over the country. I've been a Department of Energy project facilitator for 20-something years now, overseeing federal energy performance contracts. And I founded my own firm, Celtic Energy, Inc., back in 2000, ran that for almost 20 years, sold it to a big engineering firm about 5.5 years ago. I've been involved in over $2.5 billion worth of these kinds of things in every place imaginable here and overseas. A lot of federal work as well as much market work. Mechanical engineer by training. I used that engineering license in many, many states. Now it's down to just Nevada, where I currently live, and I've got multiple credentials here from the AEE. So Energy Services Coalition, great organization. It's a national nonprofit, basically set up to help foster the use of performance contracting using best practices across the country, especially in the state, local government, higher ed, K-12, basically the mush market. One of the secrets of the success of ESC is these local chapters we've set up over the years. I think we have 20-something active local chapters now, really taking the stuff that we're trying to disseminate nationally and bringing it to local folks. Dub's first poll.
Yeah, and Chris, as we're moving forward, if folks can take a look at the poll and respond, just some background on who you are and what your roles and responsibilities are related to ESPC projects. So we'll leave this up for a bit.
So I'll get started on the learning objectives here. So, you know, just in general, there's, whoops, sorry, hit the wrong button. So you're going to start to see these slides and go, oh my God, that's a lot of information, right? So number one, I'm not going to read the slides to everybody. And two, I do presentations like this because I know when I've gone to presentations and there's a few bullets on the screen and I get finished with it and then I try to go back to it a week later, I want to share with some of my colleagues or clients or whatever. All I have are those bullets and I'm trying to remember what the rest of the content was. So I put a lot of content in here, knowing that you may be sharing this with, again, colleagues, others down the road, or you're trying to refresh your memory. So anyway, that I just wanted to let people know that it definitely is going to be a little bit of drinking in the fire hose. But one of the things that we hope to do here, and we'll talk about this more later on, we're going to be setting up peer exchanges. So folks like you can talk on a facilitated hours where you can set up time to speak specifically to me or other subject matter experts like myself to ask and have answered very specific questions, right? So that this may bring up a lot of questions that we may not be able to get to or things you don't want to ask in front of a crowd. We'll have these office hours we were offering to be able to help you do that. All in the interest of helping you get your projects done and be successful, right? Dub, you want to talk about the poll?
Yeah, so thanks for those of you who responded. So it looks like kind of a mix of some people who are hearing about it for the first time. That's great. Again, it's a lot of information, but we're here to support you going forward after this. Looks like some people have some experience, some have a lot of experience. Most of you are project leads or have final approval or another function. So thanks for responding to that, and we'll swing back with a couple of other polls toward the end on future training opportunities. Thanks.
Okay, great. Next up. Okay, so basically, this is going to be an intro to the investment grade audit, which is sort of the heart of any energy savings performance contract. The development of that contract, right? The actual agreement between the owner and the ESCO, and then implementing the project you've all agreed to, right? We're going to talk just for a minute or two about performance contracting, what it is. We're going to talk about the energy audit, this investment grade audit, a lot of the components of that audit, including measurement, verification, and commissioning plans, which are two of the most important pieces of a performance contract that really differentiated from standard, normal, public construction projects. We're going to talk about financial analysis, how you pay for one of these, how you analyze the costs and so on, how you identify, allocate, and then mitigate risk in one of these projects. And again, done properly, this is one of the best ways to mitigate risk in any sort of construction you're going to do as a public or nonprofit entity. Talk about finalizing the scope and implementation plan. And once you get to that point, I think it was sort of like icing on the cake. And then review and approval of the project, both internally and externally. And then we're going to give you some links to a bunch of really helpful resources and then next steps, questions, discussion, so on. All right. With that, let's get started. Oops. So there's some acronyms, right? Everybody loves acronyms. Luckily, we're not doing this with the military where there's hundreds of them. And I've defined some of these throughout the presentation, but wanted to go through at the beginning, the IGA's investment grade audit agreement. Commissioning, we like to use the CX. Sometimes it's just a small X, sometimes it's a subscript. Measurement verification is known as M&V. Operations, maintenance, repair, and replacement is OM, R, and R. It used to be referred to as just O&M, but we're finding, especially with a lot of the federal work that we've done, repair and replacement is a huge issue, especially when you get to a 15 plus years of term of a contract. Repair and replacement becomes something it's a life cycle issue, really needs to be dealt with. Design, bid, build, right? DBB, that's how most normal public construction happens. ECM is energy conservation measure. It's an older term, but we still like to use it because it's sort of how this business all started, using that term. Almost everybody's heard of HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. IGA is your investment grade audit. ESCO, the energy services company. These are the companies that basically deliver these projects on a turnkey design build basis. And then ESPC, right, Energy Savings Performance Contract, is sort of used as the term of the industry and also sometimes the actual contract itself, right? So there's a little bit of confusion sometimes around that. Department of Energy, of course, is DOE. Photovoltaic is PV. I'm sorry, the other two are hidden behind my screen, RFP. Battery energy storage system and authorities having jurisdiction. So, which are all very, very important, especially AHJ. We're going to talk about that some more later on. Okay, so about ESPC. So what this really is you're using future savings from both your utility budget, water, sewer, everything else, and maintenance and operations budgets as capital to make these needed upgrades that you need now, right? You're basically taking the almost like the future value of these assets and bringing them back to now so you can use that and monetize the replacement of this equipment now and pay for it over time. It's very similar to getting a mortgage on a house, loan on a car, things that most people are used to doing in their private lives. This is very similar, except with performance contracting done properly, using best practices. You get to have teeth in the contract that prevent you from not receiving what you had expected, from performance to savings to recourse if something goes wrong during the deal. So we'll talk some more about that later on. So basically what we're doing is taking your existing O&M budget, right? Your energy and O&M budget. And again, this illustration is a little exaggerated for presentation purposes, but basically saying that you're going to reduce your energy use, O&M costs and all that. It's typically in the 20 to 35% range on average. The longer the term, the deeper you can get into your buildings and your other energy using assets. Using deep retrofits, you can go 40, 50%. We've seen that done in some federal GSA buildings. And then once you've reduced that budget, right, you then have to pay back the loan at the end over the long-term period, whether it's 15 or 20 years. So, and you get a small increment of savings, net savings at the end of the day. And depending on where you are, some states have absolute statutory requirements that you have to have a net positive cash flow every year of the contract term, right? So that's really what we're talking about here. Taking an existing budget, reduce your energy and O&M use, you get a loan or financing or something else we'll talk about. And at the end of that period, this last bar shows that your new O&M budget is much less than it used to be. Again, it's maybe 20, 30, 40%. And you get to keep all those savings, right? So that's how this works in general. So I know this is a very busy chart, but what it's doing is breaking down the 5 phases of ESPC. Right? This is a Department of Energy has been defining this for 25 years. Phases 1 and 2 we covered in our previous getting your investment grade audit done, or signing an IGA agreement, getting investment grade audit done, going through the contract development process, right? Getting your ESCO on board, your ESCO's on board at this point, getting your financier on board, signing the ESPC agreement, and getting the project completed, design, construction, commissioning, all the way through to acceptance. And then at the end of these 2 phases, you go into phase 5, what we call the performance period. And we're going to have another training about that phase in a few months, right? So that's what we're focusing on here. So the first step when you get into this, in this last presentation we did, we talked about how you plan out, you procure, and you hire your ESCO. The first sort of legal interaction you're going to have with this ESCO is signing this investment grade audit agreement, right? And I've seen in some places this isn't done, right? We think it's a best practice. It's absolutely required in every federal project. Probably half to 3/4 of the states have a requirement for state agencies, but sometimes local governments and school districts don't sign these. We think it's a great idea for you as the owner, especially, so you can make things clear with the ESCO. What's their scope? What are they going to be looking at? Which buildings are included, which aren't? Are we going to look at streetlights or not? Are we going to look at pools or not? Parks or not? Right? So so that 6 months later, you're not wondering, well, why didn't they look at this? I thought we had talked about that. And it's one thing to talk about it in a phone call or a meeting, and it's another thing to have it written down in a contract that everybody can agree to, right? And the only reason, of course, you ever need a contract is if something sort of goes wrong, and towards the end, we try to look back at the contract and see what we all agree to. But it's a great exercise and really hashing out scope and report requirements. How often are we going to be talking to each other? Guidance on whether you're willing to do, a 10, 15, 20, or 25-year term. What are we going to use to pay for this, right? The ESCOs have become real experts in figuring out ways to pull funding streams together, either on your behalf or at least giving you some ideas. And with some of the regulations that are out now, of course, they're not allowed to provide you with financial consulting, right? That's violates several laws at this point. You want to talk about termination and compensation provisions, and we'll talk about that some more later on in case, they put together what they think is a great audit. You don't agree, you don't want to pay them, and so on. That all can get handled in this agreement. And then one of the more important things is a timeline, right? There's nothing like a deadline. You want to put together with them a really good comprehensive schedule showing what's going to happen, both for them to know and for you to know. I see there's a fair amount of project champions on here, but there's a lot of other that are on this. It may not be you managing this project, right? You want to get your team to understand at the beginning what the expectations are going forward for them and their staffs, right? You're going to have people walking through your boiler rooms, chiller plants, counting lights, going into classrooms, going into operating rooms if you're a hospital, of course not when they're not being used. All these sort of things need to get worked out logistically early on so that everybody on both sides of this deal really understand what's going to happen, right? And it's nothing like putting us all in a contract in plain English, not filled with, legal jargon, so that everybody understands what's going to happen, right? So I think that this is key, right? And that's going to set up you to have a really successful IGA process. So some of the best practices around this is using model documents, right? This is the first single best one. And Department of Energy, Laura's group, has just put together a complete set of model documents that was a collaboration through the Performance Contracting National Resource Center folks, National Lab folks, ESCOs, others like myself are involved in it. A lot of people who have got a lot of expertise in this put together these model documents. And if you're in a state that doesn't have them, these are a great tool to use. And we're not going to get into this now, but that's a live link. So when you get this copy of the presentation, you'll be able to click on that and go to that set of model documents. And again, that's another thing we're going to do a whole presentation about this here in a few months, sort of run everybody through it. Some of the things we like to say, again, having done this for 20 plus years, and we sort of invented this about 15 years ago after going through some federal projects where the ESCO would show up, come back in 6 months with a 6-inch binder, right? And then we had to go through it and it didn't work that well. We like to have interim submissions, and we'll go through this some more later on with some more details. Allowing sufficient time to review the submissions, right? This is something that doesn't always get put into, Gantt chart schedule that shows all the different submissions from the contractor, but we need to make sure there's, 5, 10 days, whatever the case may be, for each submission so that you and your staff, again, have time to review this. And if you have an owner's rep or a legal or financial advisor, they have time to review this, get comments into a document. We'll talk a little bit later on about comment response resolution document that we've pulled from our DOE work that should be used throughout this process, right? It should be multi-tab used throughout the process. And make sure that everybody has sufficient time to do this. We don't want any sort of tacit approvals because you couldn't make it in the 5-10 days, right? That's not good. Talk about the IGA compensation. So these typically get rolled into the financing, right? And I've seen some cities and towns especially kind of get wrapped around the axle on, oh, we don't have 50 or 100,000 sitting in a budget right now to pay for this. And they will sometimes go to the next fiscal year. And you've lost 9 months of savings, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars because you couldn't get that $50,000 encumbered through an existing budget, right? And so again, when I was doing this as an owner up full time, we try to help make sure that everyone understands this can be done on a contingent basis, right? You only ever have to put this money out, this IGA fee, if the project doesn't go forward to financing, right? And 80–90% of these usually go forward into financing, right? So we want to make sure those don't get don't hang up the project, but we want to make sure it's clear in the contract, right? And there's model documents, again, I said that have all this. So if you're going to do it this way, what a lot of my former clients would do is take money out of the utility budget to pay for it out of the professional services accounts, right? And usually it's money you use to pay for your electric bills, your architects, engineers, and so on. So that's one of the best practices we've seen to keep the ball moving down the field. So the investment grade audit and the contract components, right? Like I said, the investment grade audit itself is the biggest part of this section. A lot of these are components of it. We laid it out in this sort of multicolor chain to help people sort of keep track of it. And it really becomes the basis of the project development. Much like when you're probably all of you on this webinar have been involved in either new construction of a building or renovation of a building, and you go through, your programming, your schematic design development documents, construction documents, right? And then you get into construction submittals and so on and so forth. It's much like that process here with the performance contract, right? We've got the energy audit, M&V Commissioning Plan, which gets built into the IGA, and those get put into the agreement as schedules. The financial analysis, which I talked about a minute ago, we'll get into some more detail. Then the risk analysis to see, here's the scope, here are the costs. Let's make sure we've identified where the risks are in this deal for both parties and how they're going to be apportioned and paid for. And then a scope, proposal, implementation plan, and then a final review and approval. And always trying to make sure that everybody is on the same page with all of this stuff. That is absolute key here, right? All right, next. So the investment grade audit itself, it's basically a comprehensive evaluation of all the energy consumption in the facility, but also where you're using water, sewer, operational costs, right? I've seen ESCOs come up with ideas like looking at your trash fees and putting in compactors and reducing those trash fees by like 30%, something never would have thought of. It has nothing to do with energy, right? So there's a lot of opportunities like that out there that you may not think of. And it's one of the reasons you want to use an ESCO to do this, because they can be pretty creative and have done a lot of things in a lot of different ways. Establishing the baseline for energy use is one of the single most important parts of this whole process, right? It's helping everybody understand not only how much you're spending, right? That's what everybody thinks of. How much are we spending per year? Is that $500,000, $1 million, whatever? It's where you're spending it, how you're spending it, right? Sometimes you may have, say, 20 buildings. There's 2 of them that are using half the energy, like in most, and sometimes a water treatment plant. Those 2 plants use 50% of all the energy of the whole town, right? Because there you've got, city hall, libraries, police stations don't use a lot of energy. So it's really helpful to get to understand for you all on the owner side, as well as for the ESCO, where this energy is all being used, how, like I said, there may be like peak periods, like on a hot summer day, peaks get set in your electric bill. You then have part of that bill is penalizing you for the next 12 months, right? It's a ratchet clause, it's called. So there's a lot of things like that need to get understood. And the more information you can provide to your ESCO in an electronic format, the better off you are, right? Sometimes you can sign a waiver, then go to utilities directly. There's a thing called Green Button I talked about in the last presentation that's becoming more and more popular. You can use as a way to get this known. Another part of this is, and again, this often gets overlooked, is understanding how you're operating and maintaining those buildings, right? That is the other part of the baseline. Everyone thinks of the energy baseline. It's the operational baseline. It is just important. Your operations and maintenance people internally and externally, you may be bringing in contractors and service providers to do a lot of this stuff. You need to make sure the ESCO has a really good idea of how that's all being done. That's the only way they're going to be able to put together this list of energy conservation measures and make sure that they're credible and that they can basically get to know your systems as well as they can in this 3, 6, 9-month period to put this audit together in a way that's going to deliver the savings that everyone is hoping for, the performance of the measures and the savings everyone is hoping for, and honestly putting into a contract, right? They need to be achieved. So there's all these different measures we'll talk about in a few minutes. Most people are familiar with lighting upgrades, right? Everybody's doing LEDs today, taking out their old fluorescents. Sometimes you still see, halogens and compact fluorescents around. Upgrading HVAC systems, right? That's a huge opportunity. And we saw that with the pandemic. It really sort of pulled out the Band-Aid on how bad HVAC is in this country, especially in schools. These days, installation of renewable energy systems, like solar used to be such an expensive option. Now it's like putting in a new boiler, right? It's not the greatest payback, but I've seen, depending on where you are, 5, 6, 7 to 10-year simple paybacks on putting in solar panels, and they last 30 years, right? So it's a great opportunity. Building envelope improvements, replacing and upgrading windows, doors, all kinds of things like that. Water, like I live in Las Vegas, it's a big issue here, right? Really big issue. And insulation. So one of the things they're going to talk about a few times through this is bundling low payback measures with high payback measures, right? This ESPC vehicle is just about the best public and nonprofits to be able to take stuff that a lot of time you may just do on your own. You get a lighting contractor into your facilities and go, oh, we can do this for you. Utility will help finance it. Sounds great. But you sort of eaten the low-hanging fruit then, right? Because you can do an LED replacement now for, say, a 5 to 10-year simple payback, sometimes a little more, if you put in sort of a really high-end equipment with, occupancy sensors and all these kinds of things. So one of the things I've seen is a real benefit to public agencies, especially, is taking those low payback measures, lighting, retrocommissioning, sometimes even upgrading the building envelope can be 3 to 5 year, fixing leaks and so on, blending those with the chiller plant replacements, boiler plant replacements, and these days electrification projects, right? Depending on where you are, like in California, the Northeast, and some other states, decarbonization, electrification is a big deal. And it's pretty expensive to do that because you're taking out something that was fossil fuel fired and has been for 50 years, putting in an electric fired piece of equipment, adding to the electrical load in your building, right? So that's not always the easiest thing to do. So trying to bundle all these things together into a long-term finance project is just about the best way to get this all done, right? The next thing is putting together a pro forma cash flow. Like all of you have seen some sort of pro formas, I'd imagine, in the past for various different businesses or agencies that you've been in. The pro forma is going to include the implementation costs. What's the buildup of all the subcontractor equipment services, finance costs, ongoing costs, such as loan payments, measurement verification, operations, maintenance, and so on, and those savings over time. Right, so you're going to have costs over time, but you're going to have savings over time. Net of that is that net savings you're going to see in the cash flow. So in developing this investment grade audit, there's roles and responsibilities that need to be laid out, right? For an ESCO, they're going to need to meet the requirements of whatever RFP you put out originally and hired them under, right? They need to develop this financially viable ECM package, right? If you told them, listen, we're going to finance this over a 15-year term, or we're going to use appropriated money, like one of my big clients have used in the past. And you're going to talk about the technical approach and make sure everyone agrees to that. They can't like switch in the middle. We're going to go from an energy model to spreadsheets, right? And how are they going to provide progress updates and act on the feedback, right? That needs to be talked about and understood from both parties from the very, very beginning. And the owner, for their part, needs to provide clear guidance and clear expectations. So you have to be of one voice, right? Now, that's one of the reasons that you heard me talk about the last time, having a project champion act as that point of contact. So you don't have 6 people from your town or school district or agency, or whatever it is, talking to the guest, giving them unclear communications. And that ends up in, misalignment of expectations, which is the last thing you want in a sort of a complex deal like this. So attending progress meetings, right? Making sure that the important people need to be involved in this, right? I've been, unfortunately, been involved in projects where local, legal and budget folks, they're too busy. They have all these things going on that, it's a middle of budget season, or you have a big bond referendum coming up. They need to be involved in this. If you wait till the last minute, it never bodes well, right? It just doesn't, right? And at least make sure they're informed, right? Because then you heard me talk about this the last time. Anyone that has veto power over one of these deals needs to be involved throughout the development process, especially now from the beginning, so they're not surprised at the end. And making sure your staff have got the ability to review documents and plans promptly, right? It's, again, one of these reasons we talked about hiring outside help to do this, because it may just be too much for existing staff. Witnessing baseline measurements, another really key helpful thing to get done, and engaging your key stakeholders, both inside and outside. Again, I've done this for school districts in the past, and we make sure that we're delivering briefings to the school board itself once every 3 to 6 months or so on. Okay, so this is a real eye chart. I apologize for this, but this is one of these that you'll be able to look at after the fact, right? One of the best practices that we've seen over the years, and we developed this, I don't know, 15 years ago, was this multiple submission. Much like I talked about before, you would never build a new building by hiring an architect, having come back with a year later with a finished design. It just doesn't happen. You go through those 4 phases: programming, schematics, DDs, CDs, right? Then you get it paid for, then you get it built, right? Put it out to bid and get it built. Much like a performance contract. You're not going to go and replace your lighting in 50 schools, your motors in 100 libraries and police departments and what else in a big city with a single document. You're going to go through interim decision-making process that builds in detail through every submission, right? This 30% IGA baseline report is basically, hey, we've looked through all your facilities, and this is the ESCO puts these together with your guidance and assistance, but we've looked through your buildings, we've looked through all your bills.
Hey, Chris,
Here's everything looks.
this is
Yep.
Deb. If I can halt you for just a minute, we're having some ongoing audio challenges. I think maybe the best solution would be if you turned off your video and just shared your screen, then I think we'll get clearer audio, and then we can pick you back up at the end in person for the Q&A. So let's try that and see if that helps.
All right.
Preserve a little bandwidth.
Yes, yeah, and I have a feeling that that's coming up, right? Let me get out of presentation mode for a second.
Yeah, and if you just should be able on the Zoom control, just turn off your video, stop your video, and
oh, here we go.
Okay, yeah,
how's that?
Let's try that.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, all right, so ESCOs come back, facility descriptions, baseline analysis, inventories, and a lot of times a list, right? Here's a high level list of what we think might work in your facilities, right? And sometimes you'll see that that's already sort of given them an idea in your RFP, but that way you can start talking about measures you think makes the most sense. Then usually, a couple of months later, and you give them input on this, right? There's a 30% submission. We use this comment response resolution document. You give them comments, you get their responses, and then you move forward. Make sure that when they get into this next phase, they've taken all those ideas and employed them in developing the 60%. So the 60% is sort of a scoping document to say, all right, we've looked at these ECMs, we've come up with some high-level ideas on costs and savings. And you see, I put in here native electronic format, not PDFs. So if there's things where they've started doing energy models, Excel spreadsheets, you want to be able to review those and make sure it all makes sense to you and there aren't any mistakes and so on and so forth. They're going to come up with a high-level pro forma cash flow, which we'll talk about some more later on to give you an idea of what the deal may look like, even though it's relatively early. And this can give you a lot of helpful information on, they're spending your money to develop this deal, this IGA. And if they come up with measures that are like, you know what, we're not really interested in these fancy occupancy sensors or whatever the case may be, or we have problems with solar and who knows what. It gives you a chance to go, you know what, why don't you just stop developing this measure right now. We're just not interested in this, right? Of key importance is they're going to submit a draft M&V plan at that point, right? They're given an idea. We have these, 12 or 15 different measures. Here's how we're going to approach the measurement verification to give you some input on, does this make sense to us or not, right? And again, that's where if you have an OR, they can help you with the M&V plan development so that, again, comment response resolutions, you go through all the comments, get them resolved. They move into the more detailed development, right? And this next phase is where the rubber really meets the road. That's where the ESCO starts to bring in subcontractors getting fixed prices, fixed scope, fixed prices to be able to deliver to you an actual cash flow, right? So that's going to include, what you would expect, executive summary, facility description, and so on, fine-tuning all the stuff in the 30 and 60%, an ECM section that's going to give you, okay, they're going to take out our 40-year-old chillers, put in all these new chillers, there may be heat pumps, or maybe taking out boilers, electrifying, and so on. It can be pretty complex. You want to make sure you have this written in a lot of detail, specifications sometimes, and all this, so that you and your staff, and again, and if you have outside assistants, can really look at this in a lot of detail. So they're going to submit a draft final M&V plan. Again, where you've now sort of figured out what measures we're going to install and how we're going to measure them, how we're going to commission them. In this case, they're going to do a commissioning approach, and we'll talk about that some more later. Finally, CM costs, savings analysis, and the appendices. And this is where a lot of the detail starts to come in. And honestly, this is where a lot of time needs to get spent in reviewing the documents, right? And we'll talk about this some more later on. Lastly, we're going to go through this, again, comment response resolution document. Again, make sure everything gets worked through, everyone's questions are answered. And this is where you've, and we'll talk about this some more later, you're going to get your finance folks involved at this point, right? Because now you have a really good idea of what this looks like. You're going to have a financial RFP out on the street and get somebody selected. Then you get into the 100% final IGA report, right? So there's a lot in here, but this I have seen has worked really, really well. And now that even the federal government is starting to use this way of doing the projects. So I've already talked through some of these, but these are some of the measures we see in virtually every project, right? HVAC, a lot of what we're seeing now, especially in some states, is not replacing heating systems with new boilers and furnaces, but putting in heat pumps to electrify the systems and using heat pump systems. Cooling systems, of course, again, we're starting to see in some school districts, especially, adding air conditioning to schools that never had it before, because, climate change is just increasing the temperatures in a lot of places, which adds to your electric load, right? So that's again, another ideal way of using a performance contract. Building automation and control systems, incorporating Internet of Things into your buildings is becoming absolutely key to making these buildings smarter and smarter. Lighting and lighting controls, of course. There's a lot of other energy using systems that sometimes get overlooked, like depending on if you have got like in prison systems, for example, laundries and kitchens use a huge amount of energy. They're sometimes the largest users of energies in the buildings. Laboratories, if you're like a college or a hospital system, existing solar systems, there's some that have been out there 10 or 15 years. A lot of solar thermal systems that are getting long in the tooth that need to be replaced. Data centers, of course, are getting to be huge users of energy, and ice rinks, some that more and more places are getting. Water and sewer, like I said, that's becoming more and more important, and depending on where you are, like I lived in New England for many years, and people in Boston, their water and sewer bills have become higher than their electric bills, right? It's crazy, but that's what it happens. So depending where you are, this gets more and more important, whether to just conserve water or to reduce your costs, depending on where you are. And then resilience and renewable energy systems are becoming really popular now, right? And because of what's going on with climate change, we're seeing this, yet another hurricane is about to hit Florida. It's going to, wreak havoc. It's terrible. But this is a way to help make your buildings more resilient and protect your facilities from these sort of damaging things. And I talked about electrification and decarbonization a little bit. this is becoming one of the primary and in certain parts of the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. So where you start to see some of all these different measures being put into these investment grade audits or in an ECM summary table. And this is one that I've been using for years. I didn't fill it out because it would just make this much too complicated. But you take your measures, this the ESCO is going to put this together for you, and this is going to come in all these multiple submissions I talked about. Description of the measure, how much it's going to cost to install a measure, the savings broken down in kilowatts rather. And that's monthly demand savings. I sometimes see that annual, but you get billed in demand on a monthly basis, not annually. So you want to make sure that you see it in monthly demand savings. Your annual electric savings in kilowatt hours, fossil fuels, a lot of that gets converted into fossil fuel, water. And if you have any other, sometimes may have district steam and water that can be added into this. And then summing them all up, your annual O&M savings, and then there's utility incentives, state incentives, and so on. So you can show both a gross and net simple payback sometimes, but that would have made this, again, more complicated. And then totaling them all up so you can see what are the economics of this deal really starting to look like. Next is the M&V and commissioning plans, right? Again, these are two of the absolute differentiators between standard, even other energy projects, right? Where you just are like, we need to replace our lighting and our HVAC. Like I see getting done in some like utility funded programs where there's no measurement verification and there's no commissioning. And these are two of the things that allow you to both understand what it is you're going to be paying for, and then to put teeth into the contract so that the ESCO is delivering to you everything that was expected and promised in a way that can be monitored, measured, and reported on, right? And that, for me, those two things set this aside from every other sort of public procurement I've ever worked in almost 40 years of doing this, right? And I've worked on both the ESCO side and on the owner side, as well as being in the consulting business. So for me, these are really important. And we'll go through this in some detail. It's probably going to be the biggest part of this presentation today. A lot of it includes selecting the methods. We'll talk about this later. IPMVP, that's sort of like the gospel of measurement, verification, and performance contracting. Determining the key performance indicators, all the business scheduling of M&V activities to make sure that you have your folks available to witness some of these things. Again, I think that's absolutely key as well. And then commissioning plan and activities, same thing, having your folks out there with the ESCO, making sure that they can understand what's going to be put into their buildings and how it's getting commissioned. Because once the ESCOs, say they get off the site in 2 years and it's your folks managing everything, they want to make sure they understood how everything was installed and commissioned going forward. And if any of you have ever been in the Navy, you understand what I'm talking about. Right? There's never a ship that goes out into combat theater without being fully commissioned, right? And that's one of the things I've seen great takeaways with folks who've been in the Navy on deals like this. Next, so all about the savings, right? It can get complicated, but it comes from basically these 4 or 5 different sources. These are all about guaranteed savings, right? That's one thing I absolutely love about this. It's not just, well, we think it might save you this much, right? This is going to be guaranteed to you in a contract, right? And in many places, right, this asterisk here, depending on what state you're on, right? Every federal project requires this, but many states require this as well. There needs to be net positive cash flow in every year of the contract term. So, I put this image back in here again, and that the cost savings in the top of that middle bar, that needs to be there, right? There can't be a negative savings any year of the contract. If there is, the ESCO is basically paying you. Basically, it's called making whole clauses in the contract to make sure that because you've got this finance payment or a bond payment or whatever you need to make no matter what. Like I joked in my last presentation with this, is that it's sort of like when your teenager crashes your car, you still need to make the payments and pay the insurance, even you can't use it for 2 months. So the things that are generally accepted as sources of savings for this is, of course, your standard energy, water cost savings and related savings, right? You may have things that are used less and therefore last longer. So you're going to be able to pay less for them over time, right? Like having equipment last 15 years now instead of 5 or 10. Those savings you're going to see have to be able to be monetized, right? Like a lot of people think, okay, we're going to take out all these old rooftop units, right? And you may have been paying, $20,000 a year to a service provider to maintain those. Now you're going to have all brand new rooftop units. Some of them may be all electric now, where they used to be gas and electric. You can renegotiate that contract. If you don't renegotiate that contract, you can't really claim savings, right? So that's one of the differentiators here. And that the ESCO is willing to do for you as part of this development process is work with a service provider, help you renegotiate the contract before the big deal gets signed, so you know what the savings are going to actually be, right? Cost avoidance is something that some ESCOs can sometimes get a little bit aggressive about this. They're like, oh, we're going to include that in the deal now, right? Well, only if you're willing to agree to that. We usually recommend, unless it's in this year's budget or next year's budget, it's probably not a good idea to include it as capital avoidance, right? Because you may not get that budget approved in 2 to 3 to 5 years, right? And it has to be fully documented. Again, these are a lot of details. Again, if you want to talk about this in office hours, these are some of the subtleties of these deals that it's hard to go over in a few minutes. An implementation period savings, for example, some of these deals are a year or 2 years long. If you're going to put in, say, a battery storage system, right, or new transformers, the backlog on those today are like 6 months, 9 months. You can have all your lighting installed and your water efficiency done in 3 months, and you're going to start to see savings after those 3 months. You can basically record those savings and put those into the deal as what we call a year zero payment before you even accept the project, right? So there's opportunity to do that as well. And how are these all measured, right? You set the baseline as we talked about, and then we're going to be these M&V protocols we're talking about a few minutes. It's very structured in how these things get measured over time. Okay, next, so the benefits of an M&V plan, and I cannot overstate this, right? And whenever I've been brought in the past for deals that went bad, it's usually because the owner didn't understand the M&V, or they didn't understand their responsibilities for maintaining equipment, right? But it's almost always those two things when there's a problem. So making sure this solid M&V plan, limit uncertainty, right? That's key. To be, say, giving up the operations and maintenance of some of this equipment to an outside contractor. You need to understand in detail what your responsibility is, right? If some principal of a school calls you up and like, hey, the lights aren't working, right? It may not be your folks' responsibility anymore. It may be somebody else's responsibility, right? So the risks like that all need to be apportioned, identified, apportioned, and then put into the deal, right? An M&V plan is one of the best things to do that. And I just brought this up, there were not potential O&M issues, understanding who's going to be doing what going forward. Safeguarding against future audits. This is a big deal in the federal market, not as much in the MUSH market. But in case, new mayors, new, wardens of prison systems and all that, it's always good to make sure the M&V gets done well so that the legacy becomes a very positive legacy of these deals. And demonstrating performance to external stakeholders. Boy, every time budget season comes up, and the money people are looking through everything going, well, why are we paying this $500,000 a year bill to this bank or this other financier? Well, you can go back to them and go, well, sir, ma'am, we're seeing the savings. This, $550,000 a year in savings every year because we have all this new equipment and we're paying the $500,000 a year for this over time, right? So having these M&V plans and then your annual M&V reports we'll talk about later on are absolutely key in demonstrating the performance to both your internal team and sometimes external stakeholders over time. It also helps support the success of the overall program. If any of you hear from state agencies, having M&V reports, and I've worked for other states in the past where
Hey,
annual
Chris,
reporting,
we're still having
this
the
fund does have
audio
to provide
issues.
reports to the. Yeah.
We're still having the audio lag issues, and I think it's become a distraction. I'm going to suggest we take like a
Really?
2 minute break and technical reconnection,
Okay.
and maybe if you have your phone handy and you have the direct dial in, we can try to use your phone for the audio and see if that cures it.
Okay. M&V overview. I've probably talked through most of this already. There's the baseline we talked about, M&V plan. We're going to go through some of the options here in a minute. The post-installation M&V. Once the project is basically completed and the commissioning is completed, the ESCO should submit you a post-installation report. And you want to have had, at that point, had your folks witnessing both the commissioning and the M&V activities, review that report and get it approved. And then there's the annual M&V report that I alluded to earlier. So basically on the anniversary of the project acceptance every year, this ESCO, usually within 30 to 60 days, needs to provide you with this report that shows, yep, we went through, we looked at everything again, the savings are still being achieved, or we found these issues and I talked about them and you get that resolved over usually a few weeks or a month or two. So as an example, I want to show people what this looks like. So this is sort of an illustrative way of showing that, say we have a baseline here, this big yellow box with the red trim. It's a lighting system with compact fluorescence, and you're using switches, right? The savings are made up of kilowatts and kilowatt hours. And I use this analogy for kilowatts are sort of like the miles per gallon of a car. It's the rate at which you use energy. Kilowatt hours is the actual energy you use. So if you have compact fluorescence and you replace them with LEDs, the energy draw is less, right? And if you put in motion sensors, the hours are less. You basically squeeze this down from the top and the side, so you're saving demand and energy. And measurement verification can basically prove this to you. All right, so, and with M&V, you can get carried away with trying to measure everything to death, and it costs a lot of money, which isn't really very worthwhile. So that's why 1 to 5% is a very high level number to use. And the cost should be proportional to the savings. If it's a really big part of the savings and it's a complicated measure, there's a lot of risk associated with it, like replacing a whole cooling plant and heating plant. That's worth spending the money. Sometimes it's not worth spending, just like lighting replacements. It's not worth spending a lot of money on. So you want to make sure this all gets done so you can really make sure you're going to see these savings over time. And there's measurement options, it's IPMVP options. I put a link in here, the Efficiency Evaluation Organization. For those of you really interested in this topic, this is a great organization. It basically has set up this probably 15, 20 years ago, so that there's very simple measures like lighting, motors, water, just retrofit isolation, right? You're basically going to just measure that one piece of equipment or that one set of lighting and say, okay, that looks good, and basically stipulate it for going forward. If you're going to put something that's a little more complicated, you want to measure it over a longer term. Option B is useful for. Whoops. And then if you're going to be doing a lot of measures over time, or excuse me, a lot of measures altogether that do deep retrofits or replacing plants, doing a whole building, M&V option C is probably the best for you, because you can't calculate the interactive effects for all those things, right? Otherwise. And then a calibrated computer simulation is also used for very, very complicated measures, but this is used probably 2 or 3% of the time. Now I've included in this costs, so sort of like what you see on Yelp for restaurants, 1, 2, 3, and 4 dollar signs. That's about how much they cost for each type of measure. So here's an example with a solar project, right? You put solar panels on the roof. You can retrofit, excuse me, you can isolate those by just putting in a meter, right? And most of your solar providers are going to do that. So you can see how much energy we're producing versus what we're paying the utility for, right? And if you're going to put solar panels on and do all lighting and HVAC, heat pumps and all that, you'd probably want to do whole building method, right? So that's sort of the big difference between So the M&V report that all this stuff gets summed up into are both the commissioning reports, right? And again, we could spend a whole hour just talking about commissioning. It's basically making sure the equipment is running the way it's supposed to, right? The way it was designed and the way it was installed. That's the first report you get towards the end of construction. The post-installation M&V report I talked about for a few minutes earlier, that gives you an understanding of, yep, it looks like the project is actually saving the money, the energy and the money we're expecting before you actually accept the project. And this is key. And again, we could spend some more time on this later on. And then the annual M&V reports. So sometimes these are required by state, sometimes not. I think personally it's a really good idea, especially for 3, 4, 5 years of these. Because then you get an understanding whether this stuff is really saving you the money you had hoped for or not, right? And usually if it's a problem, it usually shows up in the first year or two. So, and then how are you going to keep all this information, right? This is a ton of information you start to get. I mean, we brought this up in other presentations. There's eProject Express. Again, I've said this before. I wish we had this 15, 20 years ago. This is an unbelievable tool, and it's open protocol, right? It's put together by Lawrence Berkeley Lab. We find it better than ESCO proprietary software for that reason, but allows you to save every piece of information that you're using in this contract, including all of the commissioning and M&V reports. So what I have found in the past, what often happens is somebody leaves the organization and the information goes with them, right? Or somebody's laptop fails or computer system fails, and the information is all lost. So, and there's going to be some more trainings about this going forward. I probably talked through all of this already. It's critical for long-term project success. It's really important that you understand the M&V processes that are going to happen. And again, I've mentioned this in earlier presentations, but hiring an outside expert to help you with this, because this can become pretty complex over time. And you want to make sure that it's flexible, right? Because things are never going to occur the way you think, just like any normal construction. Buildings never get built exactly the way they're designed. It's always a little bit of a difference. And they're always operated a little bit differently. Same with performance contracting, right? So M&V plans can be written with some flexibility in there, so you have a little wiggle room as time goes on. And there's always a buffer built into these, right? If you added winter basketball season into the gymnasiums, it's not going to fill a deal like this, right? There's always room. So for commissioning, key elements are the intent. What are the expectations for this? And they're going to put a commissioning approach into these, 60%, so that you all have an idea of how these are actually to be commissioned later on. Then when you actually get to formal construction and you've told them that this is the equipment that we've approved, then they provide you with a detailed commissioning plan. And then these functional performance tests that get done, the commission report gets done, and the final project acceptance, right? So again, we could spend an hour on this topic alone. There's more information here at this live link. That's really, really helpful that DOE's put together guidance on this. And then the roles and responsibilities, much like in the IGA development roles and responsibilities. And again, I'm not going to read these through to you. They're pretty straightforward. For me, again, it's key is getting your folks understanding these from the beginning, making sure they review everything, and absolutely as much witnessing as possible with the ESCOs folks out there as they're doing tests on controls and air conditioning and so on and so forth, so that when you do finally review everything, you've been there and you know what it says in the report and whether it's accurate or not. All right, so I know I'm sorry this is taking longer than expected. We can probably keep going and talk about this some more at the end. Dub, you think makes more sense?
Yeah, I think so. We can pick this up with questions at the end. I'd say keep moving,
Okay.
and we'll come back to that slide. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. All right, thanks. Oops. Okay, so the financial analysis. So this is really something folks are probably more used to doing any sort of project. You want to know how much is this going to cost? when am I going to need to spend the money on it? Is it front loaded? Is it back loaded? Is it going to be even over time? The payment schedules, how are you going to be expected to pay the ESCO and then the financing and repayment over time? How much is the ESCO going to be paid as time goes on? And how are you going to fund and finance this over time, right? And this is where this cash flow comes in handy. So how the costs get put together. So there's this cash flow analysis includes development expenses, right? And when you get the initial proposal from the ESCO on doing this investment grade audit, there's a cost in there, right? So you're going to know whether it's 10 cents a square foot or a number, absolute number. You're going to know this going in. So when they're putting this together, and we have a spreadsheet we're going to show you later on, but a best practice for me is putting all this subcontractor cost, all their fees, whether it's design, construction, project management, commissioning, everything else, and overhead and profit into one place in a live spreadsheet with live formulas so you can see it and track it, right? And that way there's no mistakes, there's no accidentally double marking up things and so on and so forth. And you get to understand not only how much it's going to cost at the beginning, but what are the payments going to look like over time against your existing budgets, how much everyone's going to get paid, and how are you going to do what the business folks like to call the capital stacking, right? If we're going to do a lease purchase finance, we're going to use bonds, rebates, incentives, grants, so on and so forth. And again, we could probably do a whole new other presentation on this. There was one done a few months ago on using the bipartisan infrastructure law money and the Inflation Reduction Act money. This is one of the best places to use that money, right? So this open book pricing that I talked about, what we ask ESCOs to do, even when you're looking to hire an ESCO, put this into the RFP, which we talked about a little bit in that last presentation. And I've just included some examples here. They're not meant to be actual numbers. So you can see this will be filled out, that central cost bar there. When you get the actual IGA with their actual subcontractor costs from their mechanical, electrical contractors and so on, there'll be a number in there, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, whatever. And then these percentages can be applied. And then you fill in, or they'll fill in this central column. So you'll be able to see how much this actually is costing you over time. That way you can see, all right, it's going to be 2% for project development, 4% for design and engineering, and so on and so forth, making sure that this all adds up and makes sense to you, and you can negotiate these, get to understand them and negotiate them on a line-by-line basis instead of looking at 3 or 4 numbers, right? And normal construction, that's all you usually get, right? So same thing with the cash flow. You want to understand how much is this going to save me over time? And this is a very simplified cash flow. They're typically a bit more sophisticated than this, but we put this together for illustrative purposes. And in this one, we're saying energy cost savings were $100,000, O&M of 20, total savings of 120. The loan payment is 110, net cash flow of 10,000. Right, so you think about that 3-bar chart I was showing earlier. That's the top center part of that bar. That's that net cash flow every year over the term rather. And this is a 20-year term. So you've got, a total of $715,000 of net cash flow over time. Your repayments 2.2 over time, and you're saving, of course, quite a bit more than that over time. So from a value point of view, this makes a ton of sense. And you can see here, there's a 2% escalation built into the energy cost savings and the O&M savings over time. You'll start to see this if there's any O&M costs in the other side of the deal. You're going to want to include like CPI upgrades for labor costs over time. And then the loan payment that will be worked out between you and your financier over time, and then the net cash flow, right? So again, we talked a little bit earlier about positive cash flow. It's a really good idea to have positive cash flow every year, and usually a statutory requirement. And you start to see these benefits increase over time. And because these are guaranteed savings, these annual M&V reports you talked about earlier, they're going to show you that whether they're hitting these numbers or not, right? So this is going to be the pro forma that's going to be part of the agreement you all agree to at the beginning, and you'll be able to track this over time, right? So by the end of this 20-year term, you've been able to see whether this is working for your organization or not. And of course, most of you on this call won't be around at that time, And that's one of the great things about having these cash flows and then the annual M&V reports in place so that you can show your folks that are taking over that this is working. So financing this, there's typically done in a standalone agreement, whether it's done with a tax-exempt municipal lease, these TELP contracts, and probably over time, 90 to 95% of these have been done this way. Bonds are sometimes used for these as well, but TELPs, and again, I'm not a finance person, but they typically give organizations a little more flexibility and latitude. What it also does for you, you get an RFP out as the ESCO is putting together the 60 to 90% IGA. You can use that indicative pricing for the ESCO to put these final cash flows together. So that's really, really helpful. Some of the best practices, again, I've already talked about the implementation pricing done on an open book basis. You're going to work closely with the ESCO to identify and secure all the possible funding sources. And these days, this is absolutely key to a successful project because of all the federal grant money that's coming out. And a lot of this being disseminated down to states, many of which have millions of dollars to be handed out for these types of projects. There's also a lot of utility incentives that are out there. And the trick to this is working with your ESCO and your financier is figuring out a really good funding sort of arrival schedule when the money's going to show up. Like with financing, right? That comes as soon as you sign the deal, they put it into a custodial account for you and you can start drawing on that money right away. And you're going to have that when the ESCO is putting in the monthly draws to get paid during construction because they have to pay their subs. You're going to instruct your financier to pay them on a monthly basis, right? The incentives from the utilities and the federal government, of course, don't come in until you finish the project. So there needs to be sort of some bridging planning that goes on during that period. You also want to make sure you have clear buy-in from whether it's your school board or whoever else, the AHJs we talked about earlier, prior to issuing the RFP. I talked about this, getting this figured out right around between the 60 and 90%. Another thing that I've learned the hard way is making sure there's a rate lock in effect until the performance contract is approved. There's a lot of moving parts on the technical, contractual, and financial part of this that need to be taken into account. So the risk part of this, and everything we've talked about up front, all sort of drives you towards this, right? It all really comes down to the performance, operations, maintenance, performance of the equipment, and the energy that then gets used, and the costs that then get accrued because of all that activity, right? And things that can cause risks are schedule delays, right? When we look at the weather alone is causing delays in a lot of different things. We saw supply chain issues and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are typically things you see in any sort of construction, but with performance contracting, because there's a lot more skin in the game for the contractor. Getting this all talked through early on makes so much sense. And one of the things I love about this device is with ESPC, you're getting risk allocation done. And we talked about this before, hiring an owner's rep can help you be your risk mitigation agent if you don't have enough staff inside to help you do that. Like, you know, real big organizations have internal risk managers, most don't. But it can help you understand all these different risks that we talked about, right? Is the ESCO going to be able to put everything together in a timely basis, right? Are my people internally going to be able to get everything reviewed on time, right? Are going to be able to operate and maintain the equipment in a way that's meeting the contract requirements, right? And there's a great tool that the Department of Energy put together, 20 years ago, this risk responsibility and performance matrix that personally, when I was using this, when I was doing this full time as an owner's rep, every state and local government I ever worked for, I brought this to because it really helped everyone understand what the risks are in a deal like this. It really helps you understand in any sort of a construction project, but especially for this. And there's things like interest rates, construction costs, M&V, operating hours, loads, a few of which we've talked about, and how everything is really going to perform over time. And by putting this into this document, and here's an example, in plain English, and again, this is like there's 14 different things. I just put the first one in here, and it's not even including all of them. But it gives you a chance to sit down, go through this, and have both sides of the deal talk it through so that you really understand what's going to happen as you get through into the rest of the design, construction, commissioning, project acceptance, and M&V, right? For me, this is the single most important document as part of the whole document set that you're going to be putting together, because it helps you allocate the risk and really takes a lot of the risk out of this. Done well, the ESCO holds probably 90% or more of the risk in a deal like this. And finally, once you've got all this work through, like I said at the beginning, this is sort of the icing on the cake. You've finalized the scope. You've understood how everything's going to get paid for. You've figured out the risks and where they lie, and have them programmed into both the financing and the operations, maintenance, and responsibilities of everything going forward. And the ESCO is going to put together a very detailed, critical path sort of schedule for everybody, so that everyone understands what's going to happen when you get through construction and acceptance, right? Again, I won't go through all of this. Communication plan is key. Training is key. That's one of the real differentiators of a performance contract as well. There's the goals. We want to understand how everything is going to happen, timing, budgets, when is the money going to be spent? It helps everybody now that all the details have been worked out. How is it going to actually happen? I've been living through one here that I was involved in over the past 2 years at a very big school district. And just getting down to like 200 schools is no easy job, right? There's a lot of logistics that need to happen to pull something like that off. Putting a communication plan, again, absolutely key to this. Training is key. One of the things we always made sure ESCO's put into the contracts is the number of hours, classroom and in-person hours of when your folks are going to get trained, if they're going to be continuing to do the operations and maintenance, and the project schedule. Finally, the review and contract approval. All the hard work has pretty much been done to date, especially if you've been bringing internal, external stakeholders into the process throughout the whole, it's maybe a year that this takes to get to where you are, sometimes 2. Getting the approval set up ahead of time is absolutely key. And it makes this formal approval process go that much smoother. So in the contract itself, right, there's 3 components: the audit, construction, and installation contract. That's more like what you would consider your normal construction project. This is all the ECMs that are identified and negotiated in the IGA, what's going to happen at every different site, equipment to be installed, the schedule, start and commissioning we talked about. Standards of comfort, this is going to be the temperatures and like humidities and schedules you're going to be expecting in each of your buildings, the training responsibilities on both sides, and then the long-term post-construction contract responsibilities, right? The M&V plan and how it's going to be administered going forward, the baseline and guaranteed savings to make sure, again, making these payments every month or biannually or annually, you need to make sure that everything is going to be in the contract for you to be able to make sure it's getting done. These 2, the operations and maintenance schedules, are typically included as attachments to the contracts to make sure that they're clear to everybody. There's facility maintenance checklists that are attached, annual reporting requirements. And again, we could do a whole hour or 2 hours just on these alone, but these are at a high level now. And these model documents I talked about at the beginning have lots of information with educational pieces that go along with them. And then the financing agreement with the costs and cash flow analysis and the payment schedule as well. So done together, this usually works out very, very well for the owner following all these best practices. And then finally, executing this is, I already talked about most of this, as I can see right now. Stakeholder engagements, robust savings guarantee to cover the annual debt service, this make hold clauses. Again, the final documents cover that in a lot of detail. I already talked about O&M, making sure it's understood clearly in plain English through the responsibility matrix, who is going to be doing what through the term of the contract. And then requirements for record keeping and ensure the IGA is incorporated into the whatever the agreement is going to be. And this is where the eProject Express I talked about earlier is absolutely key. And at this point, you get into the final construction, the design, submittals, construction, and commissioning. Usually at this point, the ESCO has got everything done to at least a 30% sort of schematic level of design that you've been able to review. Things like water, lighting, and motors replacements are typically already 100% designed. So again, this starts with more like construction. You have a kickoff meeting. We're going to talk about protocols, schedules, so on. How you're going to review their final designs. If they go from 30 to 50 to 90% designs for, say, chiller plant replacements, that's key. You want to have those interim designs. When the designs are approved, they're going to go to equipment submittals. Again, this looks much like a normal construction project. They're going to start doing the installation and commissioning plans now that you've all agreed to what the specific equipment is going to be installed. And then the witnessing the commissioning and M&V activities. That's, like I said, looking at functional performance tests, measurements of lighting and lighting hours and so on and so forth. Then once things start to get near completion, there'll be substantial completion certificates submitted by the ESCO, sometimes by ECM, sometimes by building. The warranties will start usually then, like normal construction. You'll start to go through punch list items like you see in a normal construction project. And then finally, when most of the buildings and ECMs are done and commissioning has been mainly completed, you'll start to get this post-installation commissioning report. And again, this isn't done everywhere. It's done in every federal project now in some states, but it's another best practice we recommend where everything gets put into one document before you accept the project. And then they submit the final completion certificate that all gets reviewed, approved, then the project is accepted. So you've climbed the staircase to success, right? You've gotten through this whole process, and then the invoices start to come out in 30 to 60 days after that. And then for resources, we've got a whole list of them here. Again, we're not going to go through them, but this will be in the final recorded edition when you get this. And Laura or Dub, you want to talk about the campaign, or you would like me? So.
Yeah, I think most of you are aware of the campaign that the Department of Energy kicked off last year with a goal of $1 billion over a defined period of time in the next few years. The idea here is all of you are looking at performance contracting as a tool to implement projects and needs you have. If there's a goal, if there's a target, that oftentimes can be the motivator to move things quicker or move things to decisions. So that's the idea here. And then providing you support as you kind of move through the pathway that Chris has outlined today and in prior trainings from scoping to needs assessment to implementation to financing, all those different components of performance contracting. So that's the idea here. The other important component is oftentimes with projects, once they're completed, you just kind of stop, okay, dust off your hands and you move to the next project. We want to be able to showcase successes, and it's really important for future progress in these sort of activities to really highlight and focus on what's been successful. So we want to help you do that as well. To sign up, if you haven't done so already, there's a link again here, expression of interest form in a partnering agreement. Pretty self-explanatory, but that's all there on the DOE website. And move on to the next one, Chris. Yeah, and I'll cover this real quick. So a couple of things coming up. There's a workshop scheduled October 24th, 2 to 3 p.m. on reviewing investment grade audits and project proposals, sort of building on some of the things you've heard today. Training, upcoming training on the 28th on EECBG, the EECBG program is having a series of trainings as well that complement those that we're hosting here in conjunction with the ESPC campaign. The peer exchange, and we're going to be sending out a direct invitation to a peer exchange opportunity for you all to participate in. This is a lot of information. Chris warned at the beginning, drinking from a fire hose. You shouldn't be thirsty now because it's so much information. But how do you take this and apply it to the situations you have, the challenges, and moving across those hurdles? That's really going to be the focus of this. This is going to be an interactive session where we're hearing from people that have done things and made good progress, use some of these tools and resources, and how they can be applied to you. An important thing is when you get these slides to go back, circle and highlight those areas where you have particular questions or would like to bring these topics up in a peer exchange forum, and let us know. And so we'll be able to focus on those things and make sure you get questions answered during those peer exchange forums. And then office hours, this is another complementary piece. This is really one-on-one tutoring, if you will. If you've got specific questions, not really group setting things, but something that may be particular to your entity or the projects that you have teed up, this is an opportunity to really get one-on-one direct technical support. And let's see, we'll move to the next one. We're about at time. Case studies, yes. As I mentioned, we want to help profile successful projects. And so this is not something that we would expect you to sort of put together in a final form, but we need the information. And we'd like to work with you to sort of figure out what the best examples are. Then we can put those together and make them look nice and make you look good as far as the kind of projects that you're moving forward with and have accomplished. And next. And I think we're kind of at the questions and discussion phase. We're at time, I recognize. So what we're going to do is if I'm going to launch one last poll, and if you have a chance to respond to it, that would be great. This is an anonymous poll, so we won't be displaying the answers with everyone, but we're trying to figure out the best way to communicate all of this information in the most useful way to you, the end users. And so we would appreciate your input on this poll as we leave this screen up for a second. We'll leave the meeting open. We are at time, but if you have questions, immediate questions that have come up, now is the time to ask them, and we'll have a few minutes here. We'll stay on as long as we need to with folks that do have questions right now. Chris, anything else to add kind of in conclusion? May have lost Chris. Chris's audio. We may be muted.
Oh, can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, right. Yeah, sorry. What I was saying was sorry for the technical difficulties, and here we go. It happened again with my phone. But again, I know there was a lot of information. I know I start off a little slow. More than happy to talk to anybody afterwards. Just my email is here. Feel free to contact Doug or I, because there's a lot to this. I know that. And we have the peer-to-peer here exchanges that Doug mentioned, as well as his office hours. And, it's important to me to try to get a lot of these topics across to people in a way that they feel comfortable with it, right? And being able to talk to others about it, and trying to pack a lot of this into an hour, right, is tough. So please, utilize the opportunities here that the DOE is affording you to get some more assistance so that you can get to really understand this stuff. And it took me years to understand it. I learn more every day. So, are there any questions we can address now?
Yeah, if anyone has questions, please unmute yourself and ask. Now's a good time. If you want to wait and let this sink in a little bit, we'll have some other opportunities, again, with the workshops and the peer exchanges coming up. Okay, hearing none. thank you for responding to the poll. The folks that have done that, that's very helpful for us going forward. Again, that's Chris's information. You can get to him directly there. You can get to me and to Laura and any of the other folks involved in the ESPC campaign through Chris as well. And appreciate your attendance and your attention this afternoon. And again, thanks for putting up with our technical challenges. Those do pop up from time to time, and we hope to minimize that going forward. So with that, we'll end today. And again, thanks for your attention and thanks for your time. And we'll look forward to
Thanks,
you
everybody.
the next time. Thank you.
Take care.